Hank Williams Jr., that name gets you started real good in some ways, and it also closes the door.
Old country music legends are remembered for their fame and popularity during their era. In the history of the genre, names like Naomi Judd and Crystal Gale are unforgettable. However, few people know that these icons were battling numerous scandals and rumors behind the scenes. Get ready to be shocked in this video as we unveil 20 true and disturbing old country music rumors. Naomi Judd. Naomi Judd's public image never fully captured the weight she carried privately. Long before her death, she endured deep trauma, including being taken advantage of as a young woman and raising a child outside of marriage in an era that made that especially difficult for a young mother trying to build a life. Her marriage to husband Larry Strickland was also strained by his infidelity, something reportedly connected to the mental health struggles that eventually became too much for her to carry. After she took her own life, her daughter Ashley Judd spoke publicly on Good Morning America about discovering her mother, choosing to share painful, specific details about the method used rather than let rumors and speculation fill the silence, explaining that if the family didn't say it plainly, someone else eventually would. Ashley described the day as ordinary right up until the moment everything changed, recalling that her mother had simply asked her to stay a little longer, and she'd agreed without any sense of what was coming. She went upstairs to let her mother know a friend had arrived, and that's when she found her. Ashley said she now carries both grief and trauma from that discovery, a weight that was obvious in every word she shared. Her sister Winona later reflected that their mother's death was tied to something deeper than a single bad day, describing it publicly as generational trauma, family pain that had simply never been healed or properly addressed across the years. Tanya Tucker. Tanya Tucker built a reputation as a country star who simply wasn't interested in walking down the aisle, which made a particular rumor about her surprising when it surfaced. For years, her romantic life made headlines mostly for how consistently unlucky it was, including a brief 1981 engagement to fellow singer Glenn Campbell and 2 failed engagements to a rodeo cowboy turned producer. But her relationship with singer-songwriter Craig Dillingham was different. According to reports, Tanya was genuinely ready to settle down with him, telling people directly that if it wasn't going to be Craig, she was done with the idea of marriage altogether. She described their connection as something that had simply been building for a long time, a rare admission from a woman who had spent her career avoiding exactly that kind of commitment. Tammy Wynette. Tammy Wynette lived through more pain than most of her fans ever knew. On October 4, 1978, she reported being abducted from the parking lot of a Nashville department store while out shopping for her daughter's 8th birthday present. For years, plenty of people simply didn't believe her, some assuming it was a publicity stunt, others convinced it was a cover story invented to explain an affair. It was neither. According to Tammy's own account, she'd left her car unlocked, and a masked man slipped into the back seat and forced her to drive at gunpoint, pressing what she described as 2 inches of gun barrel into her side. She recalled being strangled with a pair of pantyhose so forcefully it left burn marks on her neck, then punched violently and left stranded 80 miles outside the city near a stranger's home. The woman who found her, Jeanette Young, later told reporters that Tammy's neck was swollen and red, her cheek skinned, and her mouth injured from being struck. Tammy called it the most terrifying experience of her life, admitting there were moments she wished she wasn't famous at all. Investigators found the case strange precisely because nothing was stolen, despite Tammy carrying 30 credit cards and $40 in cash that day. The usual motives, robbery or assault, simply didn't fit, and the fact that Tammy said she never saw her attacker's face only deepened the public's doubt. Tammy herself admitted the experience haunted her long after, telling the Washington Post she replayed the moment constantly, wondering if she could have rammed her car into another vehicle to escape. then reasoning that doing so might have gotten her killed instead. It wasn't until after her death that the abduction was widely confirmed as exactly what she always said it was. Barbara Mandrell, for a long stretch, Barbara Mandrell simply vanished from the public eye, and the guessing game about why ran wild, ranging from health scares to speculation about deeper personal struggles behind the scenes. The truth was more specific than either rumor. Barbara was forced to choose between keeping her demanding weekly television show and protecting her singing voice. And after years of grueling schedules stretching 14 to 16 hours some days, something had to give. She chose her voice, explaining plainly that she would no longer be doing the weekly series because of the severe strain it was putting on her throat. It was a painful decision for someone who loved working as much as she did, walking away from a show that had built her a fan club of over 15,000 registered devotees and millions more watching from home every week. She was candid about how much it hurt, taking full responsibility rather than blaming anyone else, noting she had been involved in every part of that show, from music selection to guest booking to the writing itself. She admitted she still felt a lump in her throat on Saturday nights whenever the gospel portion of the reruns ended and the broadcast went off the air again, a small, recurring reminder of exactly what she'd given up and why she'd had no other choice. Reba McEntire. When Titanic became a cultural phenomenon, a persistent rumor claimed Reba McEntire was originally cast in the role that eventually went to Kathy Bates. It turned out to be true. In an interview with CMT, Reba confirmed she'd been set to appear in the film, with schedules already worked out and ready to go. But a shift by director James Cameron collided directly with her touring commitments. With an entire touring crew depending on her for their livelihood, she made the difficult call to let the movie go rather than let her team down, and the role went to Kathy Bates instead. In that same conversation, Reba shared another story worth remembering: how singer Linda Davis, who'd spent years providing her background vocals, ended up landing the now famous duet, "Does He Love You?" The plan had originally been for Linda to simply record a guide vocal meant to be pitched to another female artist entirely, nothing more than a placeholder. But once Reba and producer Tony Brown heard what Linda brought to the studio that day, they were blown away, and Reba recalled turning to Tony on the spot and asking if Linda deserved the part for herself. He agreed instantly, everyone in the room agreed, and Linda got the job. The song went on to win a Grammy, and Reba later described touring and singing it alongside Linda as one of the genuine highlights of her career. Linda Ronstadt. Linda Ronstadt never married, and the rumor mill around her love life became so persistent that a saying was eventually coined about men falling into two categories: those with a crush on her and those who'd simply never heard of her. What's true is that she moved through a string of serious, high-profile relationships instead of settling down. Producer John Boylan dated her in the early 1970s, worked on some of her earliest albums, and served as her manager on and off throughout the beginning of her career, even returning to produce 2 more of her records after they'd parted ways professionally. Looking back on their romance years later, Linda described it candidly as genuinely unhealthy, something that stretched on for a couple of years before finally ending for good. After Boylan, she got into a relationship with songwriter J.D. Souther, who wrote many of her biggest songs, performed alongside her, and helped her assemble what would eventually become the Eagles, originally formed as her backing band. Souther famously recalled the beginning of their romance with real fondness, remembering how he'd suggested she cook him dinner. She'd agreed, and he showed up to find she'd made him nothing more than a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and he fell for her on the spot, moving in with her almost immediately after. That relationship, too, eventually ran its course. In the late 1980s, her connection with musical collaborator Aaron Neville grew serious enough that many assumed marriage was finally on the horizon, and Entertainment Weekly went as far as dubbing them pop music's first couple, though, like everyone before him, Neville never became her husband either. Crystal Gale industry insiders spent years speculating about tension between Crystal Gale and her famous sister Loretta Lynn, but the reality was closer to an ordinary, loving sibling bond that fame never managed to erode. Crystal spoke warmly about leaning on Loretta for guidance throughout her career, crediting her sister with landing her first recording contract in 1970 and giving her the advice to avoid singing anything Loretta already had, so the two would never be directly compared. Crystal admitted her sister was right. When Loretta passed away, Crystal was devastated and took a long time to process the loss, proof that whatever rumors swirled about rivalry, the relationship that actually mattered most to both of them was each other. K.T. Oslin's death at 78 came as a genuine shock to the country music world, closing the book on a career that started later than most but left an undeniable mark, especially through her hit, 80s Ladies. Tributes poured in from across the industry. Country Music Association CEO Sarah Traherne called her one of the most soulful voices the genre ever produced and a powerful influence for women in country music. Singer Chelly Wright wrote that Oslin never waited for gatekeepers to grant her permission. She simply walked in with brilliant songs and refused to be ignored. Travis Tritt, who toured with her early on, remembered her as a brilliant songwriter, and in his words, one hell of a lady. Her loss was felt widely and deeply. Lorrie Morgan. Lorrie Morgan has been married multiple times, but the death of her sixth husband, Randy White, hit her especially hard, and some speculated it might permanently derail her ability to find lasting stability. Lorrie described Randy as her partner, champion, and rock for 17 years, writing after his passing that her family was devastated by the loss of such a kind man. Her son, Jesse Keith Whitley, shared his own tribute, recalling Randy as a steady presence since he was a young man, someone who loved his mother and treated him and his sister like his own children, and who never once complained about the late-night pickups a teenager can require. Kitty Wells. Kitty Wells nearly saw her biggest hit erased from the industry entirely. In 1952, she released It Wasn't God Who Made Honky Tonk Angels, a direct response record that became her signature song, but its blunt message, aimed at unfaithful men, struck many as scandalously bold for the era, arriving alongside other cultural shocks like Elvis Presley's hip-shaking performances. Critics wanted it pulled from circulation, but it survived, and its influence only grew, with artists like Dolly Parton and Patsy Cline later recording their own covers of the song. Willie Nelson. Willie Nelson's marriage to Shirley Collie ended over an affair that came to light in the most unexpected way, a hospital bill left lying around the house listing the birth of a baby girl to a Mrs. Connie Nelson. Shirley had no idea who Connie was until that exact moment she read the paperwork. Willie's daughter Lana later confirmed that her mother learned about both the affair and the baby simultaneously, from a piece of paperwork rather than any kind of confession, and that it was the same way she herself first learned about Connie's existence. Willie acknowledged in later interviews that Connie had actually been his girlfriend for several years before the pregnancy happened, meaning the affair had been going on far longer than anyone in his marriage realized. Shirley couldn't move past the betrayal once it was out in the open and ultimately left him, unable to tolerate the infidelity any longer. That heartbreak, though, didn't stop further affairs from following in the years after. Johnny Cash. Johnny Cash's brushes with the law were real, and more than one. He was arrested at the Mexican border in El Paso after customs agents found roughly 1,000 amphetamine pills hidden inside his guitar case, a discovery that led straight to handcuffs. Johnny admitted once he stood before the judge that he recognized his own mistake, calling it appalling misconduct on his part. He was fined $1,000 and given a 30-day suspended sentence after fellow musicians Gene Autry and Tex Ritter personally wrote letters vouching for his character. That wasn't his only night behind bars either. After a show at Mississippi State University, Johnny found himself arrested for drunkenly picking flowers out of a resident's garden in the middle of the night. He later told the story with amused disbelief, recalling that he'd simply been walking down the street around 2 a.m. looking for cigarettes when he reached down and picked a dandelion and a daisy along the way. A car pulled up. Someone demanded to know what he was doing, and picking flowers ended up costing him $36 and a night in a Starkville jail cell, a story he joked about for years afterward, still half hoping to get his money back. June Carter Cash. June Carter and Johnny Cash's marriage made headlines for beginning while both were still legally married to other people, and June's own history had rarely been part of that conversation the way Johnny's was. Before Johnny, she'd been married to soccer player Edwin Nix from 1957 to 1966, with one child from that relationship, and before that to singer Carl Smith from 1952 to 1956, with a child from that marriage as well. Johnny, meanwhile, remained married to his first wife, Vivian Liberto. Throughout the years his relationship with June developed, a marriage that had produced 4 children since 1954. Once June entered the picture, Vivian later said, all her efforts to save the marriage felt wasted against how relentlessly June pursued Johnny. She admitted she would have given anything just to hear Johnny say he was sorry for how things unfolded. Vivian eventually moved on, marrying a man named Dick Diston in 1968 and remaining married to him until her own death in 2005. Patsy Cline's story is one of the most tragic in country music. Despite her talent, she reportedly struggled for acceptance in her own hometown for much of her career. That struggle ended abruptly and devastatingly on March 5, 1963, when she died in a plane crash near Camden, Tennessee. In a cruel irony, her music found even wider audiences after her death, with songs like Sweet Dreams becoming massive hits posthumously. She was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame the same year she died, cementing a legacy that arguably grew larger once she was gone. Jessica Andrews found fame young, but along with it came something disturbing, a fan who began impersonating her, booking shows, and threatening to release music under her name. Jessica said the situation got bad enough that it affected her own ability to release music. The story took a bizarre turn when the impersonator herself called into a radio program to give her side of the story, insisting she'd never actually booked shows or released anything under Jessica's identity, and offering to stop entirely if Jessica would just get back to making music. The hosts, stunned, offered the woman $500 on the spot to simply leave Jessica alone for good. Loretta Lynn's Don't Come Home A-Drinkin' with Lovin' on Your Mind became a massive hit, and Loretta was open about exactly where it came from, a period when her husband was cheating on her, and she channeled that pain into an upbeat warning song for other women in similar situations. It spent a week atop the Billboard Hot Country chart and helped define her as a songwriter unafraid to write from lived experience rather than romantic fantasy. She later told the Wall Street Journal that most songwriters of her era stuck to falling in love or breaking up, while she simply wrote about whatever had actually happened to her. Garth Brooks faced serious allegations when a woman filed a lawsuit accusing him of forcing himself on her and physically assaulting her. The accuser had reportedly worked with Brooks as a hair and makeup stylist, and, according to the complaint filed in California, the incident occurred during a 2019 work trip. Brooks denied the claims when they surfaced, but the accusations were later confirmed to be accurate, a serious blemish on the legacy of one of country's biggest commercial stars. Hank Williams Sr. helped build the foundation of modern country music, but his refusal to play by anyone's rules eventually caught up with him. Persistent behind-the-scenes trouble led to him being formally banned from the Grand Ole Opry, stripped of his membership entirely. It marked one of the most chaotic chapters in the career of a man whose influence on the genre still outweighs the turmoil that surrounded him. Merle Haggard's rough beginnings are well documented, including being dropped off at a juvenile detention center by his own mother, who reportedly had run out of options and described him as incorrigible. He was already in trouble with the law by age 11, a pattern of run-ins that continued straight through his teenage years and only got more serious as he got older. In a 2010 NPR interview, Merle used that exact same word himself, admitting with striking honesty that he was probably the most incorrigible kid anyone could have met, and that he was already on his way to prison before he'd even fully realized what direction his life was heading in. He later called himself, plainly, a screw-up, a description that only makes his eventual rise into one of country music's most respected songwriters that much more remarkable. Waylon Jennings quietly battled substance addiction for 27 years, a struggle most fans had little insight into at the time it was actually happening. What ultimately pulled him out, by his own account, was love, specifically the fear of losing the thing he cared about most, his music and his passion for it, if he didn't find a way to get sober. That fear became the turning point. Once he found his way out of addiction, he poured that hard-won freedom straight back into his art, releasing music that stands today as some of the most respected and enduring work in the entire genre's history, proof that even the darkest chapters can end in something worth remembering. That's 20 stories from country music's golden era,